on our 10th anniversary of Agile 100 conference. And it's my pleasure to welcome here Cherie and Alex. They are those two coaches I always look up to and kind of thinking if there is a coach I would recommend to anyone, Cherie always came to my mind. So I'm glad to have her and Alex as well. Welcome and handing it back to you.
All right. Well, thanks, Susie. I appreciate that. Let me grab our slides and share. Welcome, everybody. Happy to get to see you today. Let me just get everything settled here. And here we go. So welcome, everybody. I'm excited to be here with you. And Alex and I are going to be talking about a topic that's really exciting to us and dear to our heart. As Uzi said, we're both coaches. And so we're going to be talking about coaching. And one of the things that I've seen as a leader of coaches is that there's something that coaches do that really gets on the nerves of their clients. So I've worked in coaching organizations, and there's two major complaints that I've gotten when the organization has said, "Get this coach out of here." And the number one is the one we're going to talk about today, and that is this: falling into this trap of thinking that coaching is just asking questions. Um, Coaches get, for some reason, either they believe that this is the only skill that's involved in coaching or not sure what, but there's this big fallacy that is, if I'm coaching, I have to ask questions. I can't do anything else. I can't say anything else. When the client says, "Hey, how do I do this?" I'm supposed to say, "Well, how would you like to do this?" And then they want to throw you out. So we want to tackle that today and see if we can't open up the horizons a bit.
And we definitely don't want anybody to be thrown out of their engagement. And here's another fallacy that we see a lot coming up in our classes and in agile coaching engagement. There's this notion, and it came from CTI, that people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, right? And that is true. We are not arguing with that. People have all the resources to achieve their goals, to achieve their stated goals, as long as those goals kind of very well thought out. You might have heard of well-formed outcomes. So that's the best way to form the goals. However, it's taken to extreme by a lot of coaches. So people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. So I, as the coach, cannot help them by telling them what to do. I cannot give my opinion because that's not going to be coachy. That's not going to be asking questions. That's going to be something else. And that's a fallacy because you are a partner with your client. You are there to help them whichever way is helpful for them. So if you see somebody going over the cliff and you're telling them, "Hey, there's a cliff, don't go over there," and then you're standing back and like, "I'm a coach, I cannot do that," that's the definition of fallacy. So today we will try to give you some ideas. What's there beyond the powerful questions? What's there beyond questioning the client? What's there beyond maybe their own knowledge so that you can serve them to the best of your abilities as a coach?
Yeah. So when we look at coaching, let's take it from this point of view. When you're there and all you're doing is asking questions, you're probably in a place where you've got maybe high support, maybe low support of your client. And that's I want to make sure that you're taken care of. I want to help you, all those things, but probably not a whole bunch of challenge. So the thing about coaching is if you've got high support, which is great, you also have to match that with high challenge. Your clients don't bring you into their world so that you can just be nice to them. Anybody can be nice to them, right? So if you've got a leader, how many people do you think are telling the leader the truth about what's happening? Probably not too many. So what happens is when you have low support, low challenge, it's a place of apathy. It's not, I don't think it's coaching. When you have high support and low challenge, well, now you're just kind of colluding with the client. Like Alex said, they're getting ready to go off the cliff, and you're like, how would you like to go off that cliff today? What would it feel like to go off that cliff? Right. And so that's not helpful. And so if you have high challenge but low support, well, here comes the other reason why I get complaints about get this coach out of here. It's because you're not actually looking at the client as creative, resourceful, and whole. You're creating resistance because you're telling everybody what to do because you're smarter than them. So we don't want either one of those dynamics. The dynamic we want is actually coaching for high performance and being a high performing coach, which is a high level of challenge and a high level of support. That's where you bring the balance. That's where you bring the sustainable change. That's where the client owns their own change, and you're not trying to change them, but you're challenging them to go beyond where they are today, to go beyond where they were when you found them, so that when you leave them, they're different.
Mm-hmm. And one of the key components in successful coaching is to coach the whole person, the person in front of you, and not their problems, because it's the person that created this problem. Even if you go coaching a team, look at the team as the system, right? And another fallacy might be in coaching teams at this is the bad actor on this team. This is the person who created this problem. Let's coach them out, or let's coach the problems that is created, ignoring the team as the as the system. So, and when you look at the whole person, there are so many levels to look at, right? So, and this is just one of the one of the ideas that you might want to keep in mind when you're looking at the person and when you hear them talking, when you hear them communicating, you might start realizing that they are speaking from different logical levels. And this is the logical levels pyramid, right? And they might be speaking from environment, behaviors, and capabilities, the lower level. So you might hear that, well, I can never do that because I don't know how to do that, right? So they might be speaking from capabilities. And you might turn it around and say, you cannot do that yet. What do you need to learn to do to be able to do that? Or they might come across with their hopeless, helpless, and worthless. I am not worthy of this result. Who I am to talk to those people, who I am to teach them, right? These are some kind of beliefs, some kind of limiting beliefs that stop them in their track and that don't let them go forward, right? So we as coaches, as professional coaches, we should be capable of working at each and every level, logical level of this pyramid, and be able to walk up when needed and down when needed. So usually when the person is positively kind of talking positively, you want to bring them up, you want to look at them as at their identity as the whole person. And when they go down on themselves, when they are speaking negatively, bring them to the lower levels where it's environment, it's behaviors, it's capabilities. And now we're going into some specific competencies that will allow you to traverse this pyramid.
So when we look at ICF, the International Coach Federation, which is the major body in the world that coaches subscribe to, that is a credentialing body, kind of like Scrum Alliance. Coaching is not a regulated industry, but if there was a regulator, These guys, along with EMCC, would probably be the two main bodies. When we look at coaching, there's a lot of competencies. Take a look at these things. We hear a lot about powerful questions, but that's only one, right? There's active listening, which, yeah, I think people know about. If you're going to ask questions, you actually have to listen to know what questions to ask. But there's also direct communication. That's making observations. That's sharing your intuition and telling them what you're sensing and what you're thinking. There's the coaching agreement, which is about understanding what are we actually trying to do here, along with the ability to be able to bring that high challenge. You've got to have an ability to create trust and safety with you, between you and your client, because it's that rapport that builds the ability to be able to have those challenging conversations. If you don't have a coaching agreement, which is I actually want to be coached, then you can't build trust and intimacy, and you can't actually do coaching. Coaching is not something we do to people. It's something we do in partnership with people. We want to build action and accountability. We want to build awareness. And all of that is surrounded by the coaching presence you bring in the room. If you walk into the room and people don't they start walking out when they see you, hey, there's a coaching presence problem, right? Coaching presence is what builds the atmosphere around so that you can have this container to work from.
You know what? When people start walking out of the room when coaching the room, there's probably coach presence there. Some kind of coaching presence, yeah. And so we go into kind of considering all these competencies. And one thing I want to make it absolutely clear, there's a reason these are competencies. These are not skills that can be trained. We can train you all day long, and we have classes to train you. However, you cannot get these competencies out of a class. You need to go to the real world. You need to work with clients, and you need to practice and practice a lot. So for example, for ICF ACC, you need at least 100 hours of practice. For PCC, 500 hours of practice. And for MCC, God forbid, 2,500 hours of coaching practice. That's a lot. That's like take more than a year and a quarter, and you practice without breaks for sleep, for food, and for whatever, right? So it takes a lot to build these competencies. And notice that we don't start with powerful questions. Powerful questions are absolutely fantastically important competency, right? And again, it takes much more than just a class to learn how to ask the right powerful questions. However, we start with the coaching agreement. And a lot of not so good coaching sessions I see is because the coaching agreement is either not there or is not clarified enough, or there's some kind of problem with its watertightness, that it's not as tight as it could be. So the importance of coaching agreement is that the client comes to you with their situation, with their problem, with their question, right? And we just trust them. All I want is to understand, to answer this question. And we're like, yeah, okay, let's answer that question, right? That's not the point. Remember, the point of professional coaching is to evoke awareness. And evoking awareness starts from the first question, starts from the first conversation. So answering the question is probably not enough. And probably that's where you are not giving a lot of awareness or evoking awareness. What happens? So what do you want to achieve when you answer this question? What will become available to you? How are you going to use that knowledge when you answer that question? Then how do you know we answer that question? How do you know that the answer you got is actually something satisfactory, right? And it doesn't mean that it's a positive answer. It might be a negative answer, but what became available, what opened up for you so that you can move forward? Why now? Why is it important? Why? So you come to professional coach and it's expensive proposition, right? So why do you want to spend your money and time working on this goal? What's important about that? Why is it worth your time, effort, and brain effort and money, right? And the last consideration is very important. So we got our goal, we got our problem, we got our measurements and importance, and then we're like, okay, let's coach. The considerations, what needs to be considered, the things that we need to be talking about to answer this question is crucially important, because that's when we start digging deeper and start identifying some things that actually affect the goal. And in the bigger sense, you might want to consider well-formed outcomes, which lends really well to clarifying the goals, which kind of gives absolute clarity what people want to achieve. And you cannot do that without our next competency. It's building trust and intimacy.
Right. So I know what you might be thinking. It's could be something like, yeah, y'all are talking about professional coaching. That's that stuff that you do with one person. But I coach organizations, I coach groups. Well, the truth is, when you engage with an organization, you have to have a coaching agreement. When you engage with a team, you have to have a coaching agreement. Otherwise, you don't know where you're going. And you can also build trust and rapport, not with just an individual, but you actually have to build it with the entire organization. Otherwise, you'll get nowhere. When you get resistance, it's because the trust and rapport is not there. So building trust and rapport is about respecting the client as being competent, whole, complete. If you think for a moment and ask yourself the question, if I truly saw the people I work with as competent, creative, resourceful, and whole, and believe that I'm not there to fix them, what would be different about the way I interact with them? And so that's the key question to ask yourself as a coach. Am I seeing them as creative, competent, resourceful, and whole? So part of this building trust and rapport is being able to be with the client and express support. Support doesn't mean, oh, I'm here with you, I like you, oh, poor thing. That's not support. Support is, so here's my professional opinion, in some cases as an Agile coach, and what would you like to do with it? How does this work in your organization? And guess what else it is? When they decide to not do what your professional opinion says, it's to say, okay, well, your business decision, and I'm here to support you, and let's move forward and let's see what happens, and we'll take it one day at a time, because it's not your business to run, it's theirs. Right? And so the other thing is, we want to encourage the client to keep speaking. What else is happening? What else do you want? And it's not about your voice, it's about their voice.
Yeah. And it's interesting. So, and as we talked about that, my favorite saying from Cheshire came up. And yesterday, I actually read a variation on that from Yogi Berra, that if you don't know where you're going, you will end up someplace else, right? And the thing is, like, it's so applicable to each and every competency here, right? And it's very applicable to coaching presence. So it's not only the client who shows up for a coaching session, it's the coach who shows up for the coaching session. And they actually know where they are going. They are going into this safe, however uncomfortable space for the client, and they are there, they are being there with their whole being, not behind the client, not ahead the client, side by side with the client, maybe a step behind, so that client can make decision where they're going, right? And again, I talked about that, but I cannot repeat it enough that we are coaching the person. We are coaching this whole entity, right? With its own identity, values, and beliefs, the competencies, behaviors, and environment, right? If you focus on one thing at a time or on one thing only, you're missing the whole depth and breadth of everything that that person brings to the table and everything that might be causing this problem or might be helping them to get out of that problem, right? And what helps immensely in the coaching session is curiosity. We human beings are judging machines, and that is not to put anybody's down. That actually made us who we are, that helped us to survive. However, when we go into coaching session, we need to find a way not to shut down these judging machines. It's not possible, let's face it, but to hush it, to put it into lower gear, and to listen to something else, to listen to curiosity. You know what they say, curiosity killed the cat? So human beings, they can actually withstand a lot of curiosity and stay alive. So I would encourage every coach to bring in a lot of human curiosity. However, it's different curiosity from that than you bring to a regular conversation. There, your curiosity is for yourself because you are learning for yourself. Here, it's the client's learning, and your curiosity should serve their learning, should propel them forward. So I'm curious, what would it feel like when they achieve that? I'm curious, what would be useful for them in this situation? And this only can come from a place of partnership, not mentorship. Mentorship is fascinating and fantastic relationship, right? And it's absolutely vital to developing talents, to developing human beings. It's not coaching, right? So, and again, I already said that you do what you need to do to serve your clients well. And sometimes they need mentoring. Sometimes they need you to bring your experience into the process and give them your experience. However, I would encourage every coach to stay away from mentorship as long as possible, because in this case, you are hampering their thinking ability. And by proxy, you're kind of like, maybe just a little bit you're broken. Maybe just a little bit you don't have something what it takes. So stay in that partnership. It's a beautiful state. And as you're staying there, you listen, and you listen a lot. And it's listening beyond hearing.
So when I hear Alex talk about this mentorship thing, it brings to mind, as an Agile coach, walking into organizations and saying, I want to work with executives. I want to work with leaders. Great. We all do. And you know what? The organization needs coaching at every level. But if you walk into an executive space and try to step into a mentoring place, guess where you're going? Not to sit down in their office. You're out the door, right? Because it's not what they need. They know how to run their company. What they need is for you to listen. And it's not listening to be able to tell them what to do. It's not listening to solve their problem. It's actually listening. It's to hear what they're saying, to hear what's going on. So you see, the difference between coaching and consulting is I'm not the expert, you are, and I trust that you are. So I want to ask you questions for your benefit. And in order to do that, I have to actually understand what's happening. So when I'm coaching, I'm not asking the client questions and the client's answering me. That's not really the way it goes. I'm listening to the client's responses. I'm hearing the whole person. I'm hearing what's happening behind the words, and I'm using that to ask questions. So the only way you can actually listen is if you stop talking. Stop talking in your head. Stop talking with your mouth. Stop talking with all the things that are going on around. Stop talking with your body language and listen to what's happening with the client. You know, Alex talked a bit ago about needing coaching practice, right? 100 hours of practice, 500 hours of practice, 3,500 or 2,500 hours of practice. But think for a moment about practice. It's not like I'm going to practice like I practice for a ball game. It's practice like practice law, practice medicine. It means experience. So the only way you can get competent is to do this. And so sometimes people are not comfortable with silence. We need to get used to not being comfortable. Silence is what allows the client to think, and silence is what allows the space for them to be uncomfortable and for them to be able to step into a new place of understanding.
Mhm. And here we are. Here are the powerful questions. Here's everybody's favorite tools that we use. However, I'm still not sure what makes a powerful question holistically, and I've been doing this for quite some time. However, we do know that powerful questions have some attributes, right? They are not transactional in nature. Remember, I was talking about being curious for the sake of the client, right? So your curiosity through the question, it makes the client learn. It evokes that awareness that something new that they haven't had at the top of their head, they haven't thought about. So if you ask a question about something in the past, then it has really little chance of evoking that awareness. Client knows that there's nothing for them to learn there. They will tell you because they are probably nice people, and they will tell you what was going on. However, the only person in that relationship who is learning at that point is you. And that's not the best spent for clients' money, right? Also, every question, every powerful question is designed to bring the client closer to that pool of awareness, to uncover. And the thing is, like us, some really masterful coach said, the sound of great coaching is not wow. The sound of great coaching is, huh. That's where awareness is. That's how your client will respond to the most powerful question you can ask, right? And your questions not only are around the situation, around the problem, they are around the whole pyramid, that logical level pyramid that we're talking about. So how's your current situation is tied to your values? What do you believe that might be holding you in place? How did these beliefs and values show up in your environment, right? So all these questions, they get this additional power, not only to give client information, but to stop them and think, and keeping silence. Remember that Cherie was talking about the silence practice and the silence competency. That's where you get that huh moment. And of course, your questions are not leading, because leading is your solution to client's problem, not theirs. And you are there not to solve their problem. And remember, they are naturally creative and whole, so you're not there to solve that. And you don't really need to beat around the bush to ask these questions. Actually, as a coach, you can be direct, which brings us to our next competency.
Mm. And so I think this is the competency that most people seem to be afraid of when they learn coaching. So they're like, well, I can't do that. I'm only supposed to ask questions. But there's a place for direct communication, and it can be really, really powerful. Because remember, the purpose of coaching isn't to get to a checkbox of a list of items that the client does. It's to get to the outcomes they desire. And so part of the way that they get to these outcomes is to get the understanding. And if you're doing a good job as a coach, what you're doing is creating awareness. And some of what creates that awareness comes out of your own intuition. When I'm coaching, I'm not down in the weeds. Remember, Alex talked a bit ago about coaching the whole person, not the problem. Well, if you think of this from an organizational perspective, we're coaching the organization and the relationships in the organization and the things that are going on in the system behind the person you're talking to, behind the team you're talking to, right? And so what's helpful is to zoom out, take a step back, and what am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I noticing? What's happening in the system that's actually putting pressure in this area that's creating this disruption? What is it that I can see from this perspective that the client might be dismissing and bringing that in? I'm noticing that when this happens, this other thing happens. When you look at that, what's that bring up for you? Have you noticed that, right? It seems to me like there's some conflict happening in the system that's being ignored. What do you think? Right? It's not just questions. It's actually bringing you in, right? But it's also not judgments. It's being able to stand in a neutral position, treat information as data, not as fact, because if you're giving your intuition, etc., it's actually just data. It's your perspective. And so we want to add a different perspective to the perspective that the client already has, right? We want to open up their world to see more. And direct communication is also not you giving long narratives. I'm going to sit down now. I'm going to tell you about how it really is. That's not what direct communication is. Direct communication is clear, concise, to the point. It's not, in the US, we say beating around the bush. So it's not just like not saying what you mean because you're afraid. I don't want to upset the client. I don't want to hurt the client. Well, if you build trust and intimacy, they're going to want it right between the eyes, right? Like, let's just give it to them. Let's just put it on the table. It doesn't make me right. It's just an observation. And so we want to give that back to the client. What do you think? What do you want to do with that? Maybe I'm right. I might be making something up in my head here, but this is what it sounds like to me. What's it sound like to you? Right? So we want to be able to bring that direct communication in, and we want to mix that direct communication in with all of the rest. So if we only bring direct communication, that's that high challenge, low support. If we only bring trust and intimacy, that's that high support, low challenge.
Yeah. And what you probably realize that what we just did in the last 30 minutes, we squeezed the 26-week program that we teach into literally 30 minutes. So you see that Well, that's because you probably got some grains of ideas what a good coaching is, right? However, I want to go back to the idea that these are competencies. These are something that you practice, that you go day in, day out and practice. And these are all the competencies that you use in your coaching conversation, on your coaching arc. Uh, if you practice that kind of type of coaching and or kind of framework, you start with coaching agreement, with watertight coaching agreement. That client is absolutely clear by the time you created that, what they actually want. You create this safe space, but safe doesn't mean comfortable. It may be uncomfortable. It might be mighty uncomfortable because you always balance that support and challenge. You always want to make sure that the client leaves your session with some actions so that they know what they're doing next. And the accountability for those actions rests with the client, because you don't want to create a crutch out of yourself. I mean, it's kind of nice that in probably job security that the client depends on yourself. That's not what coaching is. If we believe that clients are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, we took them as naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, and we want them to put on their way in the same way so that they can live their life. You bring your whole self, you bring your powerful coaching presence in the session, while you keep actively listening on all, well, not on all three levels, on two levels. Hopefully you're not internally listening there, right? You're asking these powerful questions that we keep hearing about, right? And throughout the session, through powerful questions, through direct communication, through your coaching presence, you build this awareness. And again, it doesn't have to be wow. But if you get to aha, then you achieve the goal of the coaching, and hopefully your client leaves the session better than they came in.
Okay. So there's a question in the chat box about, as a Scrum Master, should I specifically tell people that I'm going to be their coach? Would that help bring clarity? First, absolutely, that will help bring clarity, because there's this thing that I call ninja coaching. There is no ninja coaching. You cannot coach people on the slide. You can't like slip in there and be coaching them. So I actually would rephrase your question just a little bit to should I tell everyone that I'm going to be their coach, but should I ask permission and build partnership to be their coach? Because you can't coach people who don't want coaching. Second mistake that coaches make: they try to force themselves on the organization. They try to force themselves on the individuals, on the teams. And then number one question I get from coaches is, how do you deal with resistance? Well, the number one answer I give is stop creating it, right? Stop going in and acting like you own the place and you know everything and they don't. I'm the Agile coach. I came to fix you. Well, they were running that company before you got there. They're likely going to be running it after you leave, unless you do a whole lot of damage. Mm-hmm. So they've got this, right?
Yeah.
Ask permission.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
One of my favorite saying about change is basically saying that, well, there are two of them. People don't resist the change; they resist being changed. And guess what? A lot of agile coaches come in to change people, right? And second one, nobody resists the change they helped co-design.
Yeah.
Right? So if you bring people in, and that's what we do in coaching, we keep talking about this partnership. And if you invite them to co-design the change while being equal partner, then this resistance you might not even know what that is at that point.
Yeah. People don't resist Agile. They resist Agile coaches.
What was most difficult for you on your coaching journey? Like, I assume you didn't born and know how to coach, right? So what was the difficulty in
The
your?
difficulty in the coaching journey for us and our growth, um, I think it was time and humility, learning really that you cannot be a coach without humility. And so there's this big shift from I was an executive, I was a leader, I know all this stuff, I ran all these big companies, and now I'm trusting other people to do so. And so that was a big shift. And also the just changing the way I think to really empowering other people rather than being empowered.
And same thing here, and Zuzi, we probably share a lot of kind of background from technical leaders to coaches. And gosh, I could tell organizations of 100 people how to do their job. And now I need to do what? To step back and kind of do this coaching. That was hard. However, the hardest thing is the personal transformation that professional coaching skills bring. When you start listening at that level, not only you're starting listening to the client, somehow you start listening to yourself and what's going on for you. And there were a lot of stuff that I didn't like. And there was a lot of stuff that I had a choice. Do I keep going there or do I just stop and I like what I'm hearing? Right. So it's a series of choices to persevere and realize that professional coaching is not only for the client transformation, it transforms you as the person, as the human being. That's in my mind was the hardest thing.
And I can support that. We share a lot of same background. That's right. It's quite eye-opening. We have two questions in the chat. I'll start with Sunil because he didn't ask yet. And that's about can we be the coach and mentor at the same time, or shall we make it clear we are changing hats?
So they're two different disciplines. Yes, you should. Well, let me make a distinction. You should make it clear in your own mind whether you're coaching or mentoring and why there is an actual reason to shift from one to the other. So too often we shift to mentoring because we know and we want to tell, and the client doesn't actually need mentoring, right? So even if you think they might need mentoring in something, I say let them ask. But even when they ask, give it a minute, right? And so be curious. You can't actually even mentor until you understand the problem. So ask questions, understand the problem, and see what comes up for them. And if they still need mentoring, fine. And be explicit about what we're doing. Again, get permission. You can't mentor someone who doesn't want to be mentored. They didn't ask.
Yeah. And so probably a lot of people are familiar with ACI professional coach competencies model, right? So 4 quadrants: training, training, facilitation, mentoring, and what's that? Training, facilitation, mentoring, coaching. Oh, well, coaching, right? That is built on foundation of business skills, of transformational skills, and technical skills, right? So I love bringing the 5th meta skill in there, right? It's the meta skill of knowing and being able to freely walk over that model and understanding and knowing when you need to be doing what. And when you understand what you need to be doing what, you need to have skills to do that, right? That's in my mind 5th meta skill. So it's to Sunil's question and to somebody else's question, like, is that applicable to consultant, to training, to whatever? Yes. Well, first of all, you need to have this fifth meta skill to know where to move from one quadrant to another, right? And then make it explicit. Make it explicit to the people you're coaching. Because then if you don't do that, then you create a lot of confusion. Are they coaching? Are they training? Are they giving me answers? So what coaching is and what are they doing and what their purpose here?
So in the chat box, there's a few other questions. One is, how do you gauge the team when you first join them to be sure that you meet everybody where they are? Not just the team, organizations also. It's ask them what they think is what needs to change. And this is the same answer for the how do you know whether to be a consultant or a coach. Consultants come in and they look and they say, this is what's broken, let me tell you how to fix it. Coaches say, what's happening? Let's talk about what your pain points are, and let's shift and work with your pain points. What would you like to see different? How are we going to measure success? How are we going to get there together? What's your responsibility and my responsibility? And what's the ultimate outcome we want to get to? Remember, outcomes should be tied to business objectives, not is Agile successful. Agile is not the purpose. Business objectives are the purpose.
Yeah. And when you are working as external versus internal coach, of course, there are differences, right? There are differences in coaching agreement. When you're working as internal coach, there's this triangle relationship between you, your client, and client might be a team or might be an executive who you are brought to kind of coach, and the organization and the sponsor, right? So when you are there, right, you are kind of have more complex relationship. However, regardless of whether you're internal coach or external coach, all the competencies apply. These are basics. This is hygiene of coaching, right? If you don't master basics, you're probably going to be doing something really different, which might be great, but not going to be coaching.
So there's another question in the chat box about, could we name some powerful questions? I'm going to do one better for you. I'm going to tell you how to build one. So I like to say transformational questions rather than powerful, because a question is powerful in the moment with the right person, with the right situation at the right time. And basically it's a lot of luck, right? What you can do is build transformational questions, which are short, open-ended, which means they start with who, what, when, where, why, how. What and how tend to be the most effective. And you don't want questions that are going to transfer data that's right in the front of the client's brain into yours. You want questions that are forward-facing, that they haven't experienced yet, that they haven't hopefully thought about yet, that they have to stop and think. If you're asking questions and the client's just answering and it's a quick progression, they're not thinking and they're not learning. Stop doing that. Ask questions that force them to stop and think. Those are powerful questions.
Yeah. And so York's question, I think I understand what you're asking. Can coach bring suggestions? Can they offer action items? Again, it goes back to what I already said a couple of times. You are there to serve your clients, right? And if the client's stuck, at the end of the day, you can bring your experience, right? However, a couple things. First, we see a lot of coaches bringing that experience, bringing these suggestions way too often, not exploring what the client actually knows and how else they can get where they want, right? Because remember, you're coming from a different context. You don't know 100% of what your client knows, right? So you're bringing something and transferring some context and some suggestions into a completely new environment, right? And secondly, the key for suggestions is to hold them lightly. And what that means is, here's my offering, what does it look like to you? How can you use that? Is that applicable in your environment, right? What's coming up for you when you hear this, right? So it's not your suggestion that, well, in this case, if A is then B and you go implement that, right? That's a different approach to suggestions. That's a different approach to offerings.
What is your experience working with people who never ever like experience themselves coaching, but they don't also believe in it? They believe it's like, how can I help someone by just asking questions? And you can even feel the frustration when they say it, right? So, what is, to your experience, the best approach to how to bring them along?
Well, I'm going to say it's not just asking questions. If that's what you're doing, then that's the problem. So when I brought professional coaching skills into my world as an Agile coach, what happened was people, the client, all of them, top to bottom, felt respected, they felt heard, and they felt like I was in it for their benefit and not my own. And what I saw, and what every person who I've worked with, whether they've gone to training with us or just been someone I've worked with in the world, what they've said is by bringing professional coaching skills into the way they work with their client, the impact that they were able to make was tremendous. And when they left, the client was more likely to continue on the path that they were going on. And so coaching is not just questions. Coaching is listening. Coaching is meeting the client where they are and helping them to see new perspectives and new ways of thinking, and partnering with them to change their world. You're right. Asking a bunch of questions is not helpful. And I don't think people are uncoachable. I think they possibly don't want to be coached, possibly by you.
They are not ready to be coached.
They're not ready for coaching. They don't want coaching, right? So everybody's coachable. Go ahead.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. I have a last question for both of you, actually. If each of you should say one thing you want us to remember from today's talk.
Go ahead, Cherie.
Alex is going to say, come now training program. I'm messing with you, Alex. I'm going to say that coaching's not just questions, and learn from someone who knows and get feedback from someone who understands it.
And what I want everybody to take away from this, that not only it's more than powerful questions, but it's a journey for your client, and it's a journey for the coach, and it's transformational journey. And hopefully you will consider taking that journey.
Thank you.